If you've never been in war, can you even know what it truly feels like? Can you feel the horror, the terror? For instance, here's an actual headline from the Vietnam War. Doctor removes live grenade from throat of young Marine. How did that make you feel? Did you imagine for a moment that you were the Marine or the doctor? Journalism and the news often present us with cold, hard facts. And sometimes the way these facts are relayed can leave us, well, cold, hard, and indifferent. But what if there's another way to arrive at the truth? In The Things They Carried, author and war veteran Tim O'Brien invites us to experience what it's like to be a combat soldier in the Vietnam War. The book's a collection of linked stories, but the way that O'Brien tells these stories is extremely unique. Since its publication in 1990, The Things They Carried has sold over 2 million copies. It's a New York Times Book of the Century and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Critics Circle Award. Arguably, the book's impact on American literature is similar to the Vietnam War's impact on the American psyche. In this video, we'll explore the book's unusual blending of fact and fiction, the difference between happening truth and story truth, and what makes for a true war story in O'Brien's view. For more great book summary videos, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification button. If you find this video helpful, click the like button and let us know what you think below. Before we jump in, be aware that O'Brien's book does deal with very sensitive subject matter. He doesn't shy away from the atrocities, brutality, and dehumanization of war. You may find some sections of this video disturbing. We encourage you to take care of yourself and your own well-being. Let's start by addressing the book's unique form. Readers of The Things They Carried could be forgiven if they thought they were reading a memoir instead of a work of fiction. O'Brien follows the convention of memoir within the novel. A lot of stories are written in the first person, with I remember or I feel kicking off sentences. There's even a narrator with the same name as the author. And that's not the only thing the two Tim O'Briens have in common. Both, at the age of 21, were drafted in the summer of 1968 and sent to Vietnam a year later, where they served in the US Army. Both survived the war, graduated Harvard, and became writers in their 40s. No wonder we're confused as readers! The character O'Brien even alludes in one of the stories to a book that the author O'Brien actually wrote, If I Die in a Combat Zone. And the real-life writer dedicates The Things They Carried to the men of Alpha Company. Yet we learn later that O'Brien's platoon buddies are all fictional characters. They're not real people. So why does O'Brien intentionally blur the lines between reality and fiction? The answer can be found in the title story, where O'Brien writes about what each soldier carries as they march or hump through the jungle. There's the expected items, the M16s, grenades, flak jackets, canteens, ammo, sea rations, dog tags. But there's also the unexpected. One soldier keeps a pair of moccasins and the New Testament in his backpack. Another wraps his girlfriend's pantyhose around his neck to ward off danger. And then there's the downright disturbing. One soldier carries the rotting thumb of an enemy soldier. And as O'Brien rattles off these items, we realize what a credible writer he is. He's carried these things. Hopefully not the thumb. The point is, O'Brien knows what he's talking about. He's been there. He wants us, his readers, to be there too. And we are. We find ourselves in the jungle, weighed down with the same weapons and equipment as Alpha Company. At the same time, O'Brien is after more than just authenticity. He wants to give us an experience through storytelling. And to do that, he needs to take liberties that only fiction can offer. That's why he blends the two. Facts alone won't allow him to enter his characters' minds and reveal their innermost thoughts, fears, regrets. Take, for instance, the first lieutenant of Alpha Company, Jimmy Cross. A complicated character. Cross carries around the letters from a young woman named Martha. They're not love letters, even though he wishes they were. He also carries the burden of responsibility for the safety of the men under his command, as well as a deep regret about not being more forward with Martha about his intentions before he left for the war. He fantasizes about carrying her up to her dorm room, tying her to the bed, and touching her knees all night long. All right, I might not be amazing with women, but I don't think That's what they're into, man! Like Cross, the other men of Alpha Company are also carrying guilt, shame, regret, the weight of memory. They're carrying, O'Brien writes, the emotional baggage of men who might die. In other stories, O'Brien's fictional alter ego hears stories second and third hand instead of experiencing them himself. So we get an even stronger sense of the unreliability of narrative. Again, we're left wondering what's true, what's been invented. It's a disorienting state of mind, reminiscent of what Vietnam actually felt like to author O'Brien. For him, it was surreal, mind-bending, like a waking dream. Ultimately, O'Brien's blended book takes into account the slippery nature of memory, of trauma, of truth. And, as we'll see next, happening truth and story truth can be understood by looking at two stories in the things they carried: ambush and good form. In the story Ambush, O'Brien pushes aside for a moment the war's grisly statistics. 2 million civilians killed, 58,000 US troops dead, and instead focuses on the single death of a North Vietnamese soldier. When his 9-year-old daughter asks him if he's ever killed anyone, the character Tim O'Brien imagines one day telling her about the day that he killed a slender young man of about 20. The narrator O'Brien describes how the enemy soldier passed him on a trail, and how he threw a grenade that landed at his feet, exploding and killing him, leaving a star-shaped hole in his head. The story engages the senses. We see the tiny slivers of dawn breaking through the darkness and the fog of the jungle. We feel the heat and the mosquito bites. As the enemy approaches, we taste something fruity and sour rising from O'Brien's stomach. All these sensory details allow us to participate in what O'Brien felt. It's a vivid and devastating story that ends with O'Brien standing above this dead body, traumatized and scarred for the rest of his life. We can't help but wonder if the real Tim O'Brien, the author of this book, actually killed this man. But we don't have to wait for long! Maybe 40 pages or so before O'Brien spills the beans in good form. In that story, spoiler alert, we learn that Ambush is pure fiction. O'Brien writes that he didn't actually kill that soldier, and he doesn't even have a daughter! In good form, O'Brien discusses the difference between happening truth and story truth, and defines happening truth as the literal retelling of an event that actually happened. Happening truths are the facts, so to speak. Although O'Brien didn't kill that man, he did witness his death. And for O'Brien, his presence, his witnessing has been enough to trigger lifelong guilt and trauma. That's what actually happened. On the other hand, story truth is invented. It's the service of truth through story. Fiction writers aren't bound by what happened. They can write what almost happened, what could have happened, or what should have happened. If you're a fiction writer, lying is good. It's important, necessary. Story truth brings the emotions of war into the present in a way that happening truth just never could. Think about all those details that made us feel like we were crouching with O'Brien, grenade in hand. The dawn, the mosquitoes, the sour stomach. For O'Brien, something isn't true unless it feels true. Whether or not it happened is beside the point. Good stories are immersive experiences where emotional, spiritual, or psychological truths can be uncovered, and not just cold hard facts. Truth might be stranger than fiction, but sometimes fiction is truer than truth. Yes, Ambush is a fictional story, but it's true to O'Brien's nightmares. It's true because it represents the kind of thing that did happen in Vietnam. He might as well have killed that man. So if there's two kind of truths, according to O'Brien, what makes a true war story? O'Brien writes, a true war story is something that makes your stomach believe. In other words, what makes the story true is the reaction that it produces, not the content itself. O'Brien wants not only to make our stomach believe, but our head, our heart, our eyes, the back of our neck. What was your response to the young man's death in Ambush? Did it evoke a sense of shame in you? Were you creeped out at Cross's fantasy of tying up Martha to rub her knees? Like me? Those gut reactions are the truth O'Brien's after. Besides, he points out that it's nearly impossible to arrive at the literal truth in war. For the common soldier, war has the feel of a ghostly fog, thick and permanent. writes O'Brien. There's no clarity. Everything swirls. Memory itself is unreliable. And in war, memory is like the Rashomon effect on steroids. Every witness remembers things differently. By the way, if you want to do a deep dive into the difficulty of memory, check out our video on thinking fast and slow. Think fast! Here's a war story that another soldier, Mitchell Sanders, tells O'Brien. It's about a small group of soldiers that went up to the mountains to listen for enemies. Sanders describes what the men experienced at this remote listening point. As darkness closed in on them, they began hearing things they logically knew couldn't and shouldn't be there. They heard Vietnamese music, then what sounded like a cocktail party, complete with clinking glasses, conversation, and orchestral music. The non-stop noise drove them insane. Only after the men called in an airstrike did the noises finally stop. Later, the men were reprimanded because it appeared the mountain was uninhabited. O'Brien claims this is a true war story because it's difficult to tell the difference between what happened and what seemed to happen. It reveals to us the fear, isolation, and paranoia that defined Vietnam for so many young men. Soldiers tell war stories, like the one that Sanders tells O'Brien, so they can make sense of their own experiences and convey what it felt like to be in Vietnam to others. They tell stories to keep the dead alive. The more vivid the story, more alive they seem to be. Is that happening truth? Story truth? Both? Does it matter? But not telling stories can be tragic too. In another tale from the things they carried, we watch Norman Bowker, one of O'Brien's war buddies, circle around his hometown lake in Iowa on the 4th of July. Bowker has returned from the war and longs to tell his father, his girlfriend, his dead best friend, anyone at all, his story of Vietnam. Unfortunately, he's unable to, and eventually meets a tragic end. The Things They Carried shows us how we can tell stories by blending fact and fiction, how we can discover different types of truth, and how redemptive stories can be. As we've seen, storytelling for O'Brien is both an act of catharsis and resurrection. He compares his characters to books on the library shelf, waiting there for him to check them out and bring them to life once more. Fiction can allow us to imagine and even inhabit other people. In the end, stories are for joining the past to the future, O'Brien writes. Stories are for eternity. When memory is erased, when there's nothing to remember except the story. The book has so many engaging stories and profound insights into storytelling that we didn't have time to cover in today's video. If you're interested in going deeper, check out the Shortform guide to The Things They Carried. Shortform makes the world's best guides to nonfiction books, complete with short, well-crafted exercises to help you learn faster and remember more. You can get a 5-day free trial and a discounted annual subscription if you go to shortform.com/YouTube. There's a link in the description below. And support the author and publisher by buying The Things They Carried. A link to buy the book is below as well. And finally, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next Shortform video. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.